All right. So I started watching this Jordan Peterson debate, and I really got to give my 2 cents. It's a shame what he's trying to do to these individuals debating him, and I know where he's coming from. I've studied religion my whole life, really, and I do see exactly what he's trying to do. He's not being intellectually honest, and he's being slippery, but I know exactly where he's coming from. I know exactly the game he's playing. And through this breakdown, this commentary on the debate, I'm going to slowly reveal some of his deviant views that he keeps hidden. Okay, earlier in the debate, somebody asked him, "Are you a Christian?" And he said, "I don't talk about it publicly, whether I am or I am not." There cannot be a more suspicious answer than that. Okay? He says he believes in God. He will not tell you what religion he believes in. Okay? But I know what religion he believes in based upon the some of the questions he's asked, based upon some of the things he went through. Okay? For example, he says he tries to refer to God as a conscious inside of you. Okay? And he says, well, that's one of the definitions. And he's trying to define God. In reality, as we're going to see, this is my hypothesis, and I'm pretty sure it's going to come true, that he is akin to a Gnostic or a Hermeticist, also known as a mystic, also known as a Freemason. Actually, Freemasons have these beliefs. Kabbalists, they have these beliefs. In Islam, we have Sufis and Urfanis. They also have these beliefs. It actually has nothing to do with Abraham's religion, the Abrahamic faiths, and the religion does not come from God in the scriptures. It's inferred there in order to trick people. It actually predates Abrahamic religions, and what it is an actual satanic religion. And I mean, just look at everything Jordan Peterson stands for. You'll see what side he's on. Is he on God's side or Satan's side? You will see that. Look how he treats these people. Look how he's talking with the most complicated terms. So you tell me, is God's religion that complicated? Did God send a religion for all humanity? And you need these huge words to define belief. Let's see the game he's playing. I'm going to break it down step by step.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure.
So here again, he's saying Newman, whoever this guy is, he defines it as conscious. He's not referring. He doesn't give you any other writings of this individual. He's just telling you he defines it as conscious. Now let's go ahead and get
Morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition.
Okay, so he's getting into the definitions. This is Cardinal Newman. I just ChatGPT'd it. I have no idea who it is. Let's discover this together. It refers to John Henry Newman, 1801 to 1890. Okay, it's not ancient history. He was eventually he was a Catholic. He became a cardinal in the Roman Catholic Church. ChatGPT says he was not a Gnostic, so there you go. But let's look at his views. He was originally an Anglican priest, key figure in the Oxford movement, which sought to bring the Church of England closer to its Catholic roots. In 1845, after deep theological study and personal reflection, he converted to Roman Catholicism, which was controversial. He was ordained a Catholic priest and later a cardinal by Pope Leo XIII in 1879. He was declared a saint in 2019 by the Catholic Church. He emphasized the development of doctrine and the rational foundations of faith. Okay. His famous works include certain books here: Development of Christian Doctrine, Spiritual Autobiography, The Idea of University. He defended Orthodox Christian doctrine, the authority of the Church. His emphasis on the harmony between faith and reason puts him on the opposite side of Gnostic traditions. If you're exploring... okay, let's go on. So, not a Gnostic. He tried to relate to consciousness. Let's continue listening. I'll pull up more stuff on him.
What do you mean when you say you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I...
Okay, so before we get to that's going to get very interesting. But some more about the writings of this Cardinal Newman, who was just, basically 150 years ago. It's not ancient. He says, quote, conscious is the aboriginal vicar of Christ. In other words, he's saying that conscious is not merely a human faculty like reason or emotion, but a kind of inner revelation, the echo of God's voice within the soul. In other words, he saw conscious as a divine in origin. It's not something we invent, it's something we receive. When we listen to our conscious, we are in some sense hearing God's guidance. Now this does coincide with an Islamic view of something called fitra, which means, your inner compass, your inner moral compass that's born with every human being. That is something I do believe in. So I guess his point, but I would like to hear more about what he's saying with this point. Let's see. Now,
by that, it isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity.
So he's saying basically the union of your beliefs and actions, that's something you believe. You base your life on it. He's saying if you actually believe it, you're going to live your life that way. We could think of many examples where that's not true. And as we're going to see, this gentleman actually says, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Will you lie? He's gonna say, I wouldn't lie. He's like, would you not lie if you're being persecuted, like the Jews were in Nazi Germany? Would you not lie then? And then he says, I'm not gonna get into that. He says, let's listen on.
At the bottom of it, that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
how would you define belief? Something you say?
Well, can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your life?
Don't be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
So that's a very bold statement. So he's saying basically, this is where I got the whole Gnosticism thing from, because they believe that your beliefs and intentions, they attract what you have inside, gets attracted to you in this life. So in other words, if something bad happens in you to you in your life, it's there to teach you a lesson, because you're not on the correct path. You're kind of veering off into some devil territory. So don't do that. If you were aligned with God and connected with God, then these bad things wouldn't happen to you. This is the belief system of mysticism, of Gnosticism, and every religion has its own version of this. It goes back to Hermeticism or Neoplatonic ideas, and it's an ancient Satan worship idea, that's heretical, and it has nothing to do with Abrahamic religions. In fact, in reality, we do have many stories where good people are persecuted, even in the Bible. You have prophet Joseph, who's persecuted by his brothers. You have the story of Cain and Abel, where a brother killed another brother who did nothing wrong. Okay, how would Jordan Peterson's mind square that away? He wouldn't. Okay, he wouldn't. These stories exist in the Bible and the Old Testament for a reason. They exist in the Quran as well for a reason. These are here to explain how reality works in the view of Abrahamic religions. If you veer off that, you're no longer following an Abrahamic religion. You're following another religion that was given to you by, I would say, Satan. Okay.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? If
I
they're
would have
asking?
done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that
would
situation
you
to begin
lie?
with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypothetical?
So he's saying I would have done everything I could have not to be in that situation to begin with. Okay, so I would not be in the situation where refugees, Jewish refugees, come to my house seeking help. How would you avoid that? In the example given, it would be unavoidable. You would just be a German citizen sitting, not knowing anything's going to happen. You're a good person, and you have people coming to you seeking help. Okay, so how exactly is it that I just don't understand. Let me continue this, but this also goes just against biblical stories altogether. It goes against which is the same as the Quranic stories. It just goes against it. Like I don't get how he's trying to say this is consistent with Abrahamic faiths. It's not.
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you
don't
eat today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if you
you
ate
are.
it today.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical?
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Like I don't understand what his issue is here. The hypothetical makes sense. Jordan Peterson is trying to blame the house, the head of the household in Germany, in Nazi Germany. He's trying to blame the head of the household for existing there with having refugees come to him for help. He's trying to say that somehow the head of that household did something wrong. Or maybe he's trying to say, well, if all the citizens were good and spreading good, evil wouldn't have happened to begin with.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because you
I
don't
did
like, are you like
clarify it.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic hypothetical where you put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why
anti-fascist?
are you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters. When I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true?
So they got into this line of debate because Jordan Peterson made the assertion that to have a belief, it's something you would die for and you would never lie. and he would never lie. So he's bringing him a situation where you might have to lie, to help people avoid persecution. And Jordan Peterson is somehow saying, I can't answer that. He's saying you made mistakes to even be in that situation where you would have to lie. It doesn't make much sense to me.
So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage.
Okay,
but that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So this is the mystic religion. The belief system is that bad things happen to you and you get put in difficult situations as a result of your own misdeeds or misgivings regarding your own inability to connect with God in some way, okay, to be pure enough. So, which is very ironic that these are the terms that mystics speak in, that you would want to be pure enough so that these things don't happen to you. Jordan Peterson sees the entire world in a spiritual manner, and he said, and he sees all cause and effect in a spiritual way. Okay, Abrahamic religions do not teach us this. Okay, we have a physical world. That's what God teaches us. Now, somebody taught you that the world is all spiritual. Every cause and effect and thing that could happen to you, it has a spiritual base, and a spiritual cause and a spiritual effect that has to do with your own spiritual journey. It's all connected. So Jordan Peterson believes everything that happens to you is connected to your own spiritual journey. This is a belief system that somewhat rhymes with religion. It somehow rhymes with Abrahamic religion, but it's not accurate. It's not completely accurate. It's not a law, but he believes it's a law because he's a Gnostic.
You would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly
without
that's not
the
what you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it.
said-
You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How is
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Jordan Peterson fell flat on his face here. He just made a definition that this kid proved wrong. And the definition he used for belief was so wild that I don't know why he went out on a limb to make that assertion. That belief is something you would die for. I would never lie. Doesn't make any sense. And by the way, it started with whether, with his beliefs, and he avoids that subject.
My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something other than the other.
It's a hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you could call it top or bottom, I suppose.
Right.
At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right, but at the
Or
bottom is
top.
God, and there
That's
are...
a definition, yeah.
Yeah, so at the bottom is God,
Yeah.
and there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying...
So they're not all equal. Like, all foundational principles are not equal, even though they might be equally foundational. Right.
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So repetition.
It's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game. Right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So
So did he mention anything about God's scriptures? No. Did he mention the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Islamic Quran? No. He is a Gnostic. He has his own belief systems. It has nothing to do with Abrahamic faiths. Okay? This whole value, what you value is what you worship. So you put God at your heart first. You do mantras to God. You spend time doing mantras to God. Then somehow you connect to God. You become pure. This is what they believe. Okay? This is their religion. Okay? He said value systems. It's things that's good for all of us. Okay? How is that an Abrahamic faith? There's whole societies that all agreed on worshiping idols, and they all got along. Abraham comes along, he starts smashing idols. They get upset with him because he's distorting the thing that they all have harmony over. Okay, so explain, like, wouldn't Abraham be breaking that? What about Sodom and Gomorrah? That's the story where you have homosexuals being destroyed by God. The whole city gets destroyed by God. They all agree on being homosexuals. The God of the Bible, the Abrahamic faiths, he says that's evil, and he destroyed it. They were living happily in that city, right? So there's many examples in the Abrahamic faiths from the stories of the prophets where it's not about getting along, it's about applying God's laws. Okay, so he should come out as a Gnostic, and he's saying, I want to hide my beliefs. So explain to me, if you have godly beliefs, that God would want to spread these beliefs. That's why he brought prophets to spread the message, right? So does God tell you that my message should be hidden? No, the devil tells you that his message should be hidden. If you're following God's law, you would not hide the message. Okay.
Explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values, but why is it that this iterability makes it better, and what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily.
Right.
So it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that...
Okay. I'm sorry for pausing this a lot. You got to bear with me. Likely to be selected voluntarily. Where in the Abrahamic faiths are the rules and prescriptions laid out likely to be selected voluntarily? The people did not accept voluntarily human sacrifice. They like to do human sacrifice. Okay, the people did not accept voluntarily homosexual. They like to be homosexuals. Okay, the people did not accept voluntarily, for example, taking the Sabbath off work. Okay, yet God forced this rule upon the Israelites. Okay, God did not, tithing, given to charity. People voluntarily do not like to give to charity. God encourages giving to charity. People don't voluntarily like to pray. God encourages praying and maybe going to congregations. Okay. God doesn't like divorce. Okay. And actually, people don't like being monogamous, but God recommends monogamy. Okay. I understand some prophets were polygamous. They had multiple wives. I understand that. But as a whole, the message is to, somewhat favors monogamy, and definitely would favor monogamy with the female. Okay, in the Old Testament, the punishment for adultery, I believe, is stoning to death. In the Quran, it's lashes in the Quran. Okay, but the idea there is it's sin, because you have to have a force to force people not to do this. Okay, to do a lot of these things.
In some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
Harmony.
Harmony, right?
Yeah, that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking, because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right.
Okay?
So he's assuming maybe Western society has been successful because it implements Christianity. Perhaps that's what he's assuming. Okay. I don't know exactly how he would assume that. The Roman Empire fell. England was in the War of the Roses. It was in hundreds of years of war. And then the Spanish and Portuguese empires, they fell. The Dutch Empire fell. The British Empire fell. The American Empire has eclipsed or falling. Right now, the strongest nations in the world, the strongest nation in the world right now is China, and they're atheist communists. Again, Gnostics have rules that do not reflect reality. They are following a deviation. Okay, Gnostics or Freemasons or Kabbalists, all these mystics, they're all following a religion that's not an Abrahamic religion. It has nothing to do with Abrahamic religions. The Pharaoh had a very successful country. God brought him down. Okay, it was not like his rules didn't just not work out. It was God that brought him down. Okay, so the Quran at least is filled with examples, as well as the Bible, I would assume, of societies being destroyed because they would not follow God's law. Okay, not because the human-made law didn't work. No, the Pharaoh's country worked. People were. It was the richest, most powerful country on earth, and a lot of the stories we see are rich civilizations, powerful civilizations that reach great heights that end up being destroyed either by God or by one of God's servants. Okay.
Talking about within a system, that when we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system.
By the way, I'm sorry for pausing this. Now, a Gnostic would say, yeah, one of God's servants destroyed it. Okay, so they'll focus on that part. They won't focus on, for example, the sea crashing on Pharaoh, destroying his army. They won't focus on that. That's an act of God. They'll say, no, God works through humans, and a human can connect to God by being pure, which is the same exercise we're doing. Okay, so these Gnostics, they see themselves as going down a path that's similar to a prophet. Okay, they think that if you purify yourself, you will have access to the universal God, who they see as everywhere. Okay, not necessarily above in heaven, but they see him in everything. And they would say that, well, me as a human, I could become God's servant if I purify myself. That journey, though, never leads to purification. It leads to embarrassment. It leads to ruin. And these are the things it leads to, because God will crush people that have this belief either in this life or in the end. And Jordan Peterson is an individual that gets a lot of hate online, and people really dislike him. Okay, so if he's preaching God's message, he would have a lot of people that love him and want to follow him, but he doesn't have that.
Right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stance independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
There's an element of that that's true. So, for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. So Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you mean independent of people?
Independent of people. We can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay. I completely agree. So, in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
So it's in reference to
Okay, so again, this is a deviation of God's law. This is a deviated belief system where he believes that this is called aestheticism, okay, where he believes in the end time prophecies of Jesus coming back and establishing heaven on earth. Whereas God's message is that judgment day could happen at any time without warning, and it would surprise you. So these are two competing messages that a lot of religious individuals don't understand, that you can't have a day of judgment where the horn is blown, everybody goes to judgment day, the world ends. You can't have that exist, that concept of coming at a surprise. You can't have that exist and then also have end time prophecies of Jesus coming back and a big war and a Lord of the Rings type war happens, which is awesome. I love Lord of the Rings, but unfortunately, this is not saved for the end times. We're going to have a lot of these things happening over and over again throughout time, but God's warning you about the day of judgment because he's telling you it's going to come without warning. So don't wait to be a good person and follow God's law. Do it now, because in the next 10 minutes you could die. Okay, the world could end and you're going to be judged how you are. Okay, so if you don't want to go to hell, don't wait till you're 90. You might not live to age 90, right? But individuals who believe in these end time prophecies, they believe that they have a long time. They believe they're going to get to old age if they're healthy, because Jesus hasn't come back yet and he hasn't established heaven on earth, and they believe if you just have Jesus in your heart, you're going to be saved, and all these type of things. I don't know if he believes that, but that's what he's talking about.
So,
or the goal would be the imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence.
Oh, right, okay. It is God.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out, because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so if someone can believe...
That's the most nonsense answer. Shoulder your cross and nudge uphill regardless. What does that mean? Like, exactly what does that mean? It's saying that we all suffer and you got to be patient and keep going. I guess patience is a good, is a good answer. But every religion on earth, even pagan religions, advise patience and perseverance. I mean, you won't have any religion that doesn't advise that, Abrahamic or not. So that doesn't answer what it means to be a Christian at all. Like 0%.
Even someone can have a God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right?
And I'm telling you, Jordan Peterson is not a Christian. Nothing about him screams Christian to me. I don't understand it.
So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they just...
No, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that,
Again, if the action matters, like he says, like he tries to say, see, he doesn't say whether he believes that or not. You would think Christ would want you to teach the message of Christ if you're a follower of Christ, and not hide it and say, I don't want to share what I believe. You would preach the message of Christ, but instead he's using the Bible, the stories of the New Testament and Old Testament, in order to avoid... He's using them to debate these young individuals without taking a position himself, because he's hiding his beliefs.
To be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that, like, acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like, for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
Yeah, that's a very good point. She asked you to define Christianity. You said bearing a cross and suffering. She said, well, how is somebody that does that Christian? Like, all humans do that.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
But he answered that. When she asked you, he answered that.
Can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example. So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right, and I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right, now the contrary to that would...
There's so many civilizations in history that survived and thrived for hundreds of years, generations, with that exact mentality. So I just don't see it.
Be something like, you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
He's referring to, I assume, Neoplatonic philosophies, which is a myth. It's Hermeticist mysticism, and essentially he's agreeing with her that, hey, you don't need to know anything about the prophets, the Bible, the rules of Christ. If you live your life according to what we think are godly principles, then you will go to heaven. That's not an Abrahamic concept. Okay, it's simply not.
So
is that person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right. So you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them. Right. So then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like that.
Christian. Well, but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say, I am Christian? Like, I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
Well,
wanna understand.
I hesitate to do that personally because
Okay.
I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act
how you say
and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same. Right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So
right?
what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see.
Why in boxes?
Like, when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say,
like by Jordan Peterson's definition, probably a large percentage, I would say, of atheists would be Christians. So many atheists are really good people, and I mean that. And I don't necessarily think God is going to judge people who did good and were good, perhaps that harshly. I don't think he will. I think the purposes of religion, so I'm in line with him in a way. So this is where Gnosticism, mysticism, it rhymes with Abrahamic faiths, but it's different. Okay, it's not the same. Okay, it's a different religion. It's a satanic religion. So, for example, yeah, I would agree that your actions could be aligned with the actions that God would want of us. Okay, and perhaps when God judges you, He will give you credit for all that. Okay, and you could have lived a very like Christian or Muslim life without really knowing exactly what the scriptures say or believing the scriptures, but just naturally you just lived your life according to all the rules and regulations. Okay, and you actually did good and spread good. Okay, so I'm with him there. The difference is that what he says your lifestyle should be is, I would argue, is not connected to the lifestyle recommendations of God. Okay.
more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You say atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could
So you could worship your work.
flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of
But hierarchy, he's trying to weasel his way out of there. Yeah, they worship. He just said yes, but he's saying it's not at the top of what they worship. They worship other things. So it's a polytheistic religion. So he basically is saying here that Catholicism is a polytheistic religion. That's exactly what he just admitted to here, and it's as clear as day.
worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to. Do
prioritize, and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't
Well,
add that to my definition.
you understand-
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to
So you can
Catholic.
attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
And now
there's
you're
a-
adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're familiar.
Somewhat. Who is debating? You have somebody here with an obscure religion debating about God. What could be more dangerous, man? What could be more dangerous? How many people think he's a Christian or somebody from an Abrahamic faith that will then go ahead and just say Abrahamic faiths are nonsense? I mean, he should represent what his belief system is clearly, so that people could judge for themselves what's going on here. Because if I'm an atheist watching this, I would just think that Abrahamic religions are ridiculous, you know?
Doctrines are very
How do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
So yeah, here you go. He does not claim Christianity. He does not claim Christianity. The leading theologian in the mainstream media, we don't know his religion.
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either
it,
you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something, you are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
That he should have been more patient and careful to deliver what he was trying to say. It just came out disrespectful the way he said it. When you're debating someone, you want to try not to be disrespectful as much as possible. Here he should have stuck. He should have waited. He should have said, "Look, okay, I'm something, but what are you? Are you anything? And do you have any belief system?" He should have really nailed that, because somebody should pin him down on that. Let's see if they do.
Hi there.
Hi, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably, yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice. I do
the
those
higher it
things.
is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your
Okay.
trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
And it's
prioritizing.
partly, with regard to your wife.
Okay, this point he's making, I will be fair here, even though I don't like Jordan Peterson. I will be fair that he's on to something here. In life, what you give attention, thought, prioritize, more so at the sacrifice of others, is higher on your list. But here's the thing. The Quran gives the best definition of worship. It's in the Quran. Okay, anything you think can benefit you or hurt you independently, that thing you worship it. Now, here Jordan Peterson is saying, look, we all worship. There's a lot of things on the hierarchy of worship. All the things in the triangle are things we worship, but the key is to worship God, the ultimate God, more than things lower on the hierarchy. That's what he's trying to get at. But that, by definition, is a polytheistic religion. Okay, the idea is that you don't prioritize, attend to, and value, sacrifice for your anything on earth, including your wife, your job, more so than is required for the sake of fulfilling your duties to God. Okay, in other words, you work because you have duties in life that need to be accomplished so that you can live and serve God. if you think about it in more of that sense, now my definition is not perfect either, but if you think about it more in that sense, that you could, so somebody could go make their job their entire central personality, their entire central motivation, and like more than what's required. If they have the as well, so it's the action plus belief. So he leaves belief as irrelevant. No, it's the action plus belief. So if I go to my job and I dedicate 100% of my time to my job, 100% of my attention, 100% of my sacrifice, okay? And if I do that with the belief system that my job is going to either bring me ultimate benefit, and or my job could, avoiding that, my job could bring me ultimate harm, that the cause and effect of my salvation or harm comes from my attending to my job, then you're worshiping your job. If you worship more than one thing, then you have a polytheistic religion. Okay, he seems to say that simply attending to, sacrificing, prioritizing, just the actions themselves equals worship. That's not true. If you're a farmer, sometimes you'd have to work 20 hours a day to plant your crops and then cultivate your crops, okay, and then harvest your crops. You might have to do that because your job requires that much attention and sacrifice, but you're doing it because it's a job that needs to get done and it's necessary. It doesn't mean you're worshiping. It doesn't mean you're worshiping living, because you know ultimately that it's God's decision whether or not you're going to have a successful harvest. That's up to God. So you do what you can, but you know ultimately it's in God's hands. You do what you can with your wife, your family, but ultimately you know that God's the ultimate provider of benefit and harm. So if God wants you to have a good marriage, you're going to have a good marriage. If God wants to hurt you through your marriage, he can hurt you through your marriage. You know that God has ultimate power over everything that you engage in and not engage in this world. That's the proper definition of worship. Jordan Peterson's definition, I don't know where he gets it from. I really don't know.
Say, so why do you value your wife? You do value your
Yes,
wife. Okay.
I love her, so I prioritize and I sacrifice for her.
Right. So that's within the
Okay.
right. So that's within the confines of love, let's say.
Sure.
What else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love and your marriage.
I mean, I am married to my wife because I love her. That's also why I prioritize and sacrifice for her. Right. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
I'm
Are you
trying to
making
make
that
a
claim?
definition.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a pinnacle or a foundation, you move more towards worship. Right, so even the small things, I'll give you an example. Imagine you go on a date. Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end. That's the hierarchy. The way that you attend to your wife is dependent on your ultimate aims, even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying worship is...
So his definition is weaker than mine. Your ultimate aims are based on a belief system, and he's trying to say beliefs don't matter, but your aims matter. Well, your aims are based on a belief. You believe that doing this will get you your aim. Your aim is either going to benefit you or avoiding harm. Okay, those are the reasons why we aim for things. Okay, so it's based on a belief system. So if you take it that way, his definition could be similar to mine, but he pinned himself in a corner where he said it's not about beliefs, it's about actions, which is incorrect because he just added aims, which is based on beliefs. Almost
a spectrum, right? It's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of like that's a good question.
When is it worship as opposed to just I love my wife?
The closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
how
worship.
Close to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't attend. Well, love.
So you think I worship love?
Do you attend in consequence of love? I'm trying to define something. What do you mean worship? Well, I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like. Like you.
So do you have that attitude towards your wife?
So he's getting caught. That was a bad definition that he got thrown off by Jordan Peterson, and he gave a really bad definition.
I have that
Do you
attitude.
privilege her compared to other women?
Of course, I privilege her compared to
Okay.
other women, but I don't worship her. Nor does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. Because you just offered a definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is divine above and beyond what a normal natural phenomenon can be. Not other women, no, beyond any human being could ever be. I will prioritize her over any other human, but I don't think that she is some
You're making the
being.
assumption that only the thing at the top or the bottom has anything to do with worship. And I'm saying that's not true. It's a hierarchy of prioritization. And there's either...
See, this is a Hermetic idea, as above, so below. You know, he thinks that essentially life is a training for us to be able to connect to God only, and then that's going to help you connect to God in the afterlife. That's a very dangerous view. I'll make a different video as to why mysticism is a dangerous, deviant religion in my belief.
There's something at the top or the bottom, depending on the metaphor, or you're fragmented and confused. Those are the only options.
So let's say
you're either going in many directions,
okay,
or you're going in one direction.
So let's suppose I'm fragmented and confused. Then you agree I don't worship anything.
No, then you'd worship multiple things.
So what's the threshold when it's worship, right? I prioritize a lot of stuff.
I said that the closer you get to the pinnacle, or the closer
How close?
you get...
Can you give me some sort of metric? How close do I got to get to this pinnacle?
Do you know?
So Jordan Peterson, I understand the point Jordan Peterson's trying to make here. It is a good point. Okay, the idea that everybody worships something, they might not know it. That's a good point. He's not really able to argue it. Maybe he's trying to be avoidant. But with this gentleman, for example, you could say to him that, look, you believe that your intellect is sufficient for you to reach ultimate benefit and avoid harm to yourself. He would agree yes. Maybe even Jordan Peterson would agree yes. Okay, if you do have that belief, then you are worshiping your intellect. Okay, and I'll explain that further if anybody's interested. Just comment on anything. I could expand further.
The difference between cheap literature and deep literature?
Yes.
Okay, that's the same issue. And how do you distinguish between them? What's the difference between cheap and deep?
I mean, it's really an opinion-based thing, right?
Is it? So it's just an opinion that Dostoevsky is better than a porno magazine?
Well, I've spoken to people who think To Kill a Mockingbird's cheap. It's one of my favorite books. So, I mean, people will differ on opinions.
Well, just because people are stupid about things doesn't mean that their opinion is valid.
That's certainly true. I agree with that.
Okay, well, do you think there is a hierarchy in literary quality?
I think that there is a hierarchy to an extent in literary quality, but I think once you get to a certain threshold, it is just opinion. Like, I agree. Dostoevsky is better than a porno mag, but is F. Scott Fitzgerald better than Ernest Hemingway? I don't know. What a book is, what literature is. Dostoevsky, he follows what literature is the purpose of more than the porno magazine does.
Good. Well,
so it's about purpose and definitions.
Sure. Let me give you an analog then. Okay. The depth of worship is analogous to depth of literary significance. And the closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice. And maybe you don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy then, how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
it depends on what you're seeking for.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You've claimed I worship something, and I want to know.
If you want to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top, and insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life. And if I
There's no difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay. So if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true. And then
okay. Mm-hmm. You just said everybody worships something. I think you've just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
Well,
that's a good point. You can't argue your way out of this. But I want to just again redirect your attention to the fact that Jordan Peterson here is saying you work your way up or you're working your way down. You're going up towards God step by step, or you're going down towards the devil step by step. That is a Gnostic, mystic, Freemason, Kabbalist type mentality. That's not how we are taught religion from the Abrahamic faiths. From the Abrahamic faiths, you're taught to worship God and do good, and God will have mercy on you, and you'll be judged, and you'll go to heaven or hell. Okay. And God will purify you on the day of judgment so that you can live in heaven and bliss, despite maybe you were a sinner, so on and so forth. Perhaps you died at the age of 14. You never got a chance to do many good or bad things or really reflect on religion or pursue any purpose. You might go to heaven. You might go to hell, for all we know. I mean, it doesn't fit. This whole mysticism religion doesn't fit. I dislike it. It's mostly espoused by people over the age of 40 who have lived a long life. Okay? I'm almost 40. I've lived a long life. I've had time to think about spirituality a lot. But I can't create my own philosophy on spirituality and say that that's the ultimate truth from God. I'm just making assumptions because I've lived so long. Okay? Things seem to correspond. It doesn't mean it's true. Your mind looks for patterns in things. Okay? God's world is not all in patterns. There's a lot of things that happen in God's world that are tests, just like the story of Job. Okay? Evil could come to you, or punishments could come to you, or tests could come to you. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It doesn't mean you're not on the right path. Okay? It doesn't mean your soul, you don't know whether or not your soul is becoming pure. You have no idea. You can't gauge it. There's no instruction manual from God on how to purify your soul. There's just not. You want to read into it, you can. But God doesn't give you that blueprint.
They're incoherent in their worship, and hand gestures like that aren't going to help.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Look, if you're incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh,
How do you explain that there are happy nihilists then? Because you just said they can't be.
The mere fact that you state that there are happy nihilists doesn't make it true. Like, what's your evidence? How do you measure nihilism, and how have you associated it with happiness? And what's your definition of happiness? And have you compared them to religious people? Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health. It's a well-documented fact in psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased.
And they would argue that a Christian is deluded as well. Okay, and that study might actually also apply if you were to take the same study in a place like China, where people might be Buddhist. Devout Buddhists might also have better mental health. It doesn't prove it's true. It doesn't prove the religion is true. Whether you're happy or peaceful or have anxiety or not, doesn't mean you're not on the right religion. For a Gnostic, it does. For a Gnostic, they see all religions as equal. All religions going towards the same ultimate truth, upwards to God. Okay? And they see everyone's journey as the same. It's a spiritual journey on earth. Okay? The problem with this is that you also would have to respect polytheistic religions, which is hard to do if they are the villain almost, or the antithesis of the thesis of the Bible. Okay, God's message comes telling you don't be like the polytheists, and a Gnostic will come to you and say, "Hey, everyone's on the same journey, man. We're all equal in this life, man." See how the message comes from the devil. You see, it comes from the biblical devil. If you believe in Abrahamic faiths and you believe in the Abrahamic religion of the devil and God and the devil, then you would see that this message goes against the Abrahamic faith, which means it must come from the devil.
With himself. Okay. But as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened. Because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
aren't there unhappy Christians or
Of course
devoted
there are.
believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
Well, terrible things can come your way regardless, and that does happen, but it's the case that even when circumstances become deeply troublesome, that how you're oriented makes a big difference. So I'll give you an example. So the book of Job deals with the issue of unfair suffering. So Job is a good man who has everything taken away from him in the most painful possible way.
To settle a bet, right?
With Satan, yes. And so he makes the axiomatic presumption that he won't lose faith in himself or in the spirit of being itself. And that helps him remain calm and forward-looking through his time of trial.
Doesn't he absolutely curse God?
No. His wife tells him to do that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, good. My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories. Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
That's a good question.
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text, and you can take pieces of it out of context.
This is the okay. That's a horrible cop out. There's 65,000 hyperlinks. Go read 65,000 books and then have an opinion.
Text and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake. I think it's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
how do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with that
Well, I just think that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical.
I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through the example.
He's not putting words in your mouth. He asked you, how would that fit with Christian ethics? He said it wouldn't. But you got to click 65,000 hyperlinks and take the context of these stories. That's not an answer. That's so.
And I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line with Christian ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure.
See, Jordan Peterson is redirecting the conversation to ask, is there anything such thing as a righteous war? Yeah, we can answer that. But that's not the situation of the story in the Bible that he said. The story in the Bible was that these individuals were in some way, some shape, allowed to be killed off because of the fact that they were perhaps idol worshippers. They were perhaps the wrong religion. Perhaps this is how the story goes, that hey, these people are the wrong religion, you can kill them off. I wonder, and that's the understanding of Christianity. Okay, so I know that that's the understanding of Christianity and Judaism, which is that, hey, these are idol worshippers, you can kill them. Okay, God commands you to kill the idol worshippers. That command does not fit within Jordan Peterson's worldview. So he must find it hard to call himself a Christian. That's why he finds it hard to call himself a Christian, because he's not a Christian. He's a mystic. He's a Freemason. He's a Kabbalist. He's one of these Hermetic type religions.
It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair enough.
Yeah, but this one certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but...
Absolutely not.
Look,
the genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it.
That's not a blood-soaked past. That's scripture. What are you talking about?
The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great in all like the great making qualities.
Sure.
Yeah, like flawless. Yeah. So does a flawless thing change? Does a flawless thing reveal like more?
He has a good point. He has a very interesting question. Jordan Peterson is unqualified to answer that question. I'm unqualified as well when it comes to the Bible and the Old Testament. However, I think that the correct answer, pursuant to my knowledge, is that God has a plan, and what God orders is what you follow, and sometimes there's a mystery. And that, for example, the rules of our life that are given to us by the ethics from God, they can be there can be exceptions to these rules if you get a direct order from God to make that exception. So at certain times, God could come and give one of his prophets a direct order to, hey, I know I said don't kill anybody, but these particular people, go and kill them. I know best. And you go ahead and do that. Some other examples would be, for example, Jesus making the dead come back to life. Usually, the dead don't come back to life, and that's a rule. There was an exception there. So on and so forth. There's certain recommendations and rules for God that he tells us to do and not do. And my explanation would be that, look, yes, that's true. However, God could also make exceptions to his own rules at certain times. And we need to be humble and accept that, even though that you must understand that God has wisdom beyond what we have. But Jordan Peterson, he is a Gnostic. So for him, this would not make sense. He believes morality is ingrained into the laws of science. I don't. And God doesn't say that. Okay? God makes it clear with the story of Adam that morality is arbitrary. Okay? These are arbitrary rules. Okay? Adam was in paradise or wherever he was. There's a lot of fruit trees. God says, this particular fruit tree, don't eat the fruit from it. It's an arbitrary rule. God did not have to put that fruit tree there to begin with. The fruit tree is not special. It's the same tree as every other tree there. Okay? And the devil goes ahead and persuades him to eat from that tree. But the fact of the matter is, there's nothing special about eating from that tree that's particularly evil. It's not an objective evil. It's arbitrary. A lot of the sins that we're told about, we assume that they are for our benefit, because when you follow them, you tend to live a better life. Okay. However, that's an assumption. Okay. In some cases, God says this is for your benefit, but God doesn't specify if it's for your benefit as a person, for it's your benefit as a society, or if it's your benefit spiritually for afterlife. God doesn't specify how these rules are for your benefit. We just know in some way, some shape that they're for our benefit. They could be for our benefit because they're going to get us into heaven. It's just arbitrary. God does not specifically tell you that, hey, this particular sin is bad for XYZ reason. We're asked to follow blindly God's laws, okay?
Better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but presumably...
No.
See, he believes, Jordan Peterson believes, telling the truth is a universal good. Okay? This is the assertion he's making because, again, he's a mystic. He's a Gnostic. He's a Hermeticist. He's really a deviant. He does not follow the Abrahamic faiths. Okay? There are stories where prophets have not told the truth. Okay? The prophet Abraham in the Quran, we're told he smashed all the idols. And now I'm not thinking of the correct verse, and I do hope it's in the Quran. I'm not messing it up, so you got to look it up yourself. I don't know if this is in the Hadith now that I'm thinking about it, because I can't think of a specific verse. However, as the story goes, Prophet Abraham smashed the idols. Okay, I think that's universal. I think that's in the Quran. Okay, and that he left one idol unsmashed, and he told the people that, hey, they came to him and said, who smashed the idols? He said, that idol smashed the other idols. Okay, so that was a lie. I mean, it was a lie that, was like almost a mental exercise. Like he was proving a point. Okay, another example is a story of Joseph, and in the Quran, he slipped a good into his brother's bag so that he would get charged for stealing, so that he can then pardon them with his father and have him live with him. This is in the Quran. Okay, so if you tell somebody that follows a Gnostic or Hermetic religion that, hey, prophets have lied, they will freak out because it doesn't align with their worldview. Okay, and there's probably a lot of other examples I could think of where you have examples of good people or prophets lying, not telling the truth, in certain ways because it was to achieve an ultimate goal or whatever the case may be, but where lying was seen as something somewhat good. Okay.
No, you don't get to skate over that. That's totally fine.
It's a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument.
I mean, even Moses secretly told the Israelites in secret to get together and leave. Like, that's something he hid. It's not like he was truthfully announcing it.
So the argument is that God...
Wait a sec. You said find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't say any of those words. I'm not sure what conversation you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously. I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly. Okay. Rephrase your question because I must have missed it. I tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral...
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
Our understanding might, but presumably what the perfect being is revealing...
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself.
Between our...
We can only see through our own lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
Like,
for example, are you perfect in attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
wait a sec. Let's not go to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you said, why wouldn't God? Well,
it's
1,000 years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you. But
and 1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
you
tried to make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right?
That's actually one of the smartest answers Jordan Peterson gave, which is, I don't know. We don't know. You don't need to know to accept God, exactly how God thinks. You don't need to know.
So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, under your view,
if you want to have it fail, no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue we're discussing.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more clearly so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that world...
Inevitable doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
You've been voted out by the majority. Please.
I believe determinism is a mental trick that can never be proven wrong. Whether something's free will or deterministic, you can never really prove it wrong, and it's a mental trick. And just another tool to make people believe whatever they want to believe.
Turn to your seat.
Jordan, nice to meet you.
Very zippy. What's your name?
I'm Liam.
Hi, Liam. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad.
Good.
Surrounded by atheists.
My question to you, let me scoot in, would be, what does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Jesus Christ. So every religion on earth all throughout time was doing the same exact thing. Okay, Cain, when he killed his brother Abel, was aiming up. You could make that argument. It just doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian morality is.
Yeah, but it'll come in handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. Eh?
Right.
I mean, there's other ways of representing the situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's, exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and he died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah. If there are other theologies and disciplines that have similar types of values, How then is that definition mean? Like, wouldn't those also be Christian values under your definition?
That's a good question. I spent a lot of time studying different religious systems from all over the world and found multiple interesting layers of concordance.
Right.
So, for example, in ancient Egypt, their god Horus, who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, the corrupt he was the god of attention. Right, and the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish foundational morality, and then that bled into Christianity. Meaning human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. Now, I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Daoism, for example, like a lot.
Taoism, exactly. That's a mystic religion. It's a Hermeticism, Gnostic, Freemason, Taoism. It all comes from the same philosophy which he ascribes to.
So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system. And I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still dominant, still understructures our culture, for example.
The way you feel about Horus or Taoism or something is how I feel about Christian morals, I think.
Yeah, but how do I feel about them?
Well, that you...
He is a Taoist. That's more likely. He's more likely a Taoist than a Gnostic. He's a Taoist.
You took inspiration from them, you learned from them. Maybe
that's a good start,
right.
Because I would say that actually constitutes belief. Like you said, well, look.
Right.
In Noah, in the story of Noah, right? Noah is inspired by the apprehension that all hell is going to break loose. Okay,
Yeah.
He regards that inspiration as God.
Okay.
Right, and when God comes to Abraham, he comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. It's inspiration. One of the definitions of God in the Old Testament, unsurprisingly, given the derivation of the word, is inspiration. And so if you take inspiration from Christian ideas...
Yeah, he's a Taoist. Basically, he's not Christian. Okay, you're what do they call it? He's a heretic. Okay, these are very dangerous beliefs. In fact, he probably shares more with the atheists than Christians. Actually, he's probably closer to an atheist than a Christian.
And insofar as you do that, you are in fact a believer, which was my point with regards to atheists
Correct.
not understanding.
But have
what
you
they're
taken
rejecting.
inspiration from Taoism or from studying Egyptian mythology?
Definitely.
So then you believe them under that definition?
Yeah, but I've incorporated them into something I think that's more comprehensive.
Is it possible?
So he's incorporated Taoism into Christianity. That's what Gnosticism is. That's exactly what Gnosticism is. He thinks he has a new thing. It existed already. They were persecuted, rightly so, I think.
Possible to take inspiration and to appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims?
It depends. No, I don't think so. But I think, you see, there are different kinds of truth claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what.
I should be clear. They're rightly so persecuted at that time while Christianity was growing. And in the sense that they were kicked out of the church. Okay, I'm not advocating that anybody with any belief gets persecuted for any reason.
You say, and then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do. That should be prioritized. Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity, because you brought up other things that predate Christianity that you can very closely tie connections to.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean,
Right.
I don't think the Christian claim is exactly that they originate Christianity.
So if I'm
right?
living those values, how?
So he's saying the Christian claim is that Christianity and Christian values don't originate with Christ. They originated before then.
Is it that I'm living the Christian values and maybe not the Egyptian values or something else?
Well,
that you
one
brought
of
up?
one
Pause
of
there. You've been voted out by
that
the
was
majority.
good. That was good. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello there. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What's your name?
I'm Kumari. So I was curious about this like Christian morality that you're talking about, because a lot of my issues with Christianity have to do with the base morality of it, specifically with like the idea of like the rapture and how we see people that aren't going to come up with us with the rapture, and that concept of heaven and hell. I don't really agree with that morality, but if you could explain that to me and how I do agree with that, I would love to like hear.
Well,
your
I
opinions.
can't explain the rapture to you because that isn't something I concern myself with, and that's more of a
That's true.
sectarian belief than something that's central to Christianity. Now, there's all sorts of evangelical Protestants who might disagree with that, but that doesn't have anything to do with me. You asked a deeper question with regard to, let's say, heaven and hell and judgment. Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, sin, you could put it this way, sin is what puts you in hell. Right, and so then you might ask, well, how do you know you're in hell? How about you do anything to get out of it?
Can I ask you
How
a
about
question?
you know that you put yourself there?
Do you think, is sin like a part of Christian morality?
What do
to
you mean exactly? Sin as
Like
a part?
the
It's missing
concept
the
of sin?
Okay,
Yeah.
it's derived from an archery term, and it means to miss the target. Right, and so it presumes that there's such a thing as a central target and that you can miss it in many ways, and the consequence of that will be your life will be ridden with anxiety. Your life will be
So he's a Gnostic. He's a Daoist. Okay, he's all about the spiritual journey in this life and making a heaven and hell in this life. The Abrahamic faiths are about making a heaven and hell in the afterlife. Okay, they're two different religions. One worships this life. One worships God and tries to aim for the afterlife. That's why it's a devil religion, okay? The devil, when he went to Abraham, or when he went to Adam, he told Adam, eat from that apple, you'll get, ultimate knowledge, you'll get, you'll be immortal or whatever. But basically, he offered him some benefits, some material benefits for his life. Okay, this is how the devil can deceive you. He gives you material benefits in this life by offering you secret knowledge, okay? And that's what Jordan Peterson believes. He has a secret knowledge he doesn't want to share because he knows that people can easily poke holes at him and it doesn't make any sense. And it ultimately will lead to evil every time.
less people will turn against you.
Don't believe in sin at all.
Well, do you believe in error? Have you made any mistakes?
What if I believe that the mistakes that you make, that they're fixable, and so that no sin is finite, and that the idea
that's a Christian belief.
Of the idea of hell, I don't believe
That's
in it.
also a Christian belief, by the way.
A Christian belief is hell?
No, that there's no sin that, well, there's one. The sin against the Holy Ghost is unforgivable, but that's really the sin against the process that would enable you to learn.
Okay. But there's a Christian belief that hell does exist, and if I commit sin, I'm going to go there, correct?
Yes.
So what if I don't believe in that? Like I think.
Well, you're a Christian too.
When you can I explain a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. I think that when you commit sin, that it's because of a lot of environmental factors in your life, like where you were born and who you were raised by, and so there are certain things that lead you down a dangerous path. And once you are dead, I think you're kind of removed of that person. There's no like. There are no factors of the earth that have to.
What happens after death?
Right.
So I would ask you, in these times that you've suffered.
You can't say anything about what happens after death because your religion is not geared towards what happens after death. That's, your Daoist religion. It's not, it's about living here, maybe being reincarnated here. Okay. It's not about dying, getting judged, going to heaven or hell because he doesn't believe in heaven or hell. Okay. He's not aiming for the afterlife. He's aiming for this life, which puts him in a satanic religion box.
Terribly in ways that you thought would never end. Do you believe that you had any causal role in that? Like, did you play a part in that?
In my own suffering?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I would say that there was a part that I played in that.
Okay,
but
that's
I also
the thing to find out.
I think that maybe it's like a concept of free will that I don't really believe in, somewhat of free will, that I think that there are certain things in your life that lead you to do certain behaviors. And so when you commit those sins, you go to hell. I'm not too sure why you would still be reaping the consequences of that.
Like I said, I can't address that. Do you believe that you can change?
I do.
Do you believe you can change for the better?
I do.
Do you believe that when you change for the better, you abandon the things you've done?
So the person advocating for the belief in God tells you that he cannot talk about heaven or hell. Make that make sense.
In the past that weren't good.
I think that you can.
Okay. Then that's very much in keeping with Christian doctrine.
Can you explain to me how that's in keeping with Christian doctrine?
You believe
if you would go to hell for those things?
You believe you can improve.
Yeah.
Right? And you believe that if you improved, you would let go of things that were impeding you. That's a sacrifice. You believe that improvement would be upward, and you believe that you have agency in that. Yeah. Those are all Christian presuppositions.
I guess maybe we have different opinions of what Christian morality is.
Yes, sounds
so
like
I think
it.
that
Because she's talking about Christianity, Jordan Peterson is talking about Taoism or Gnosticism.
my opinion of Christian morality is something that I don't really agree with, and maybe you would define that as like the foundations of Christianity.
Let me give you an example. So if you want to atone, which means to unify yourself and unify that with the world, then the first thing you have to do is figure out what you did wrong and admit it. That's a confession. That was good.
Thank you. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I picked Zena because I think she asked genuine questions and wasn't trying to win.
She picks the easiest target.
Hey, well, hello again.
Hi there.
She was literally the nicest, most softest, she really just asked questions.
My claim is Jordan Peterson's framework for understanding Christianity is probably not the one that the Bible intended us to use. In regards to the way that you interpret the Bible.
Actually, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Bible, I don't see, you have said in some circumstances that there's not a way to kind of say whether or not ontologically the historical claims made by the Bible are true. Like, for example, the story of Cain and Abel. You've said that this story is like a meta-truth in the sense that it exists all throughout time, culturally. And the way that you define meta-truth, I don't see a distinction between that and like a metaphor, right? But and you also say that you cannot say whether this story was true. You can say that it exists eternally, metaphorically, but you can't say that it's true. Actually. And if you can't say that there are historical facts being said in the Bible as stories that weren't really said with much ambiguity, how can we say that we can understand the Bible in the way that it's meant to be interpreted? Like, if you cannot make any claims about these stories, right? You don't know whether they're true or false. How do you know that your interpretation is the correct way?
So that's why I picked you. You ask intelligent questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was good. What do they say? By their fruits you'll know them.
Okay.
Right. Well.
And that's what these people do, man. They take one verse out of context and then they say that their whole religion is supported by Christianity. It's not. Christianity is different than whatever he believes.
So one of the things I look at is the impact of what I'm doing. Right. And so I know a lot of evangelical Christians, a lot of Catholics, a lot of Orthodox Christians, a lot of people from other faiths. And they've told me, like many of them, that they found my interpretations very helpful and that it deepened their faith. And so that's interesting because I wouldn't have necessarily expected that to be the case. And I've also talked to thousands of people who've told me that they came to understand the foundational stories of their culture better as a consequence of listening to me, and that they did everything they could to sort out their lives and that it worked. That's many different pieces of evidence that all converge on something like the practical and conceptual.
Jordan Peterson is essentially spreading Satanism for the masses. That's really what he's doing. And I'm surprised. I'm just learning this now, actually, about him. I didn't know that. I didn't know that this is what he's doing, but he's much more sinister than I thought.
Utility.
See, just because he says some things that are similar or 100% accurate with Christianity or Abrahamic religions does not mean he is espousing the same goal as the Abrahamic religions. When the devil comes to you as a believer, he's not going to go to a believer and say, hey, just don't believe in God, don't believe in anything that you hold sacred. No, he's going to tell you that, yeah, okay, but look at it this way, and he's going to try to redirect your energies towards another objective.
My approach. Now, is it the same? There is a lot of approaches to biblical interpretation historically, and what I'm doing is possibly less new than you think.
Yeah, I want to make a claim on whether this evidence is enough, right, to substantiate whether or not your interpretation is going to, be more plausible, right, be the most plausible. Because in regards
it's an open question.
Yeah, right.
You bet.
So in regards to how we interpret the Bible and how we see the Bible, something can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can add value to someone's life. An interpretation can connect you to your conception of what your faith is. But if it's the quote-unquote interpretation that God does not intend, that can lead to a plethora.
That's certainly the case. That's why the medieval Christians were so concerned about heresy.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they felt, and that's why the Catholics objected so much to the Protestant Reformation, because they believed that the fractionation of Christianity would result in an indefinite fractionation, right? Well, and that's exactly what's happened.
Right.
So yeah, that's definitely a problem. I think one of the foundational principles, for example, there's a foundational principle in the Old Testament of hospitality, right? So what you want to do if you set up your local environment properly is to make it welcoming to people voluntarily. And so one of the ways you could judge the validity of the interpretation of a classic story is whether or not that interpretation might be regarded by someone as welcoming. Does that represent something you'd actually like to have if you were acting in your own interest in the long run?
Right, and we can talk about that. Like
protect you from fear might be another one.
Exactly. So we can talk about how these interpretations of the Bible, if they kind of resonate with us. And I think that can in some case be some kind of evidence, this might be true, but I think we need to ask, is this evidence damning, right? Is this evidence certain, right?
Yeah.
So, but I do want to look at, again, the consequences and our understanding of this interpretation once more. So we look at, again, the story of Cain and Abel, and we say, yeah, so I believe this is a meta-truth. I believe that this story is resonant throughout cultures. That is all true and dandy, and I'm sure that is in some way, the story was put in here for the reason, right? To tell us about, fights between brothers. But also, you can't say I do know or I don't know that this story is false or true in an ontological, historical sense, as a historical fact. Were there two people that were specifically referenced?
Okay, I don't think that's knowable, but I'm not sure why.
How are you a Christian if you don't believe in the biblical stories? You know what I'm saying? He's not a Christian.
It matters to you.
So the reason why it matters to me is because we need to know how we should interpret the things that the Bible says, and the things
many ways.
Right. But if we interpret
sometimes poetry, sometimes history, sometimes fact,
but
sometimes
for example,
metaphor.
The reason why it's important, right, very important, is because, for example, we can talk about something like God says, I believe it's 1 Corinthians 15:17, something about how belief in God specifically as someone who resurrected or as someone who died for our sins is important, right? But we have to look at, if we can interpret that as just you have to believe that God is a symbol of sacrifice. That is different from believing that there was an actual person named Jesus Christ who died on the cross for our sins.
True.
So if you believe one and not the other, that can be the difference between you going to hell and you going to heaven. So if we cannot...
That's a very good point. If the message came to you from prophets and you're choosing not to believe in it, and not follow it in a literal sense, there's a chance that you might not receive God's mercy and you would go to hell, especially if you rejected it out of arrogance, for example.
We cannot say that we know whether or not certain historical facts in the Bible happen, even as just events, because the events matter, because again, God dying for our sins on the cross was an event. If we can't say that we know these things happened, these things did or didn't happen, this then leads us to kind of the conundrum of how do we know what we are meant to believe, what the Bible intended for us to believe, and this can be very, very important to our fate. Do you see what I'm saying?
I've got no disagreement with any of that. What sort of response do you want from that? You pushed me beyond the limits of my knowledge.
Really?
Well,
I think
there's so many things you can't know. I'm struggling. I know that the biblical stories are the foundation of Western culture. I know that the consequence of those stories has been the genesis of a society that is in the main freer and more abundant than any societies have ever been. I don't exactly understand the relationship between those stories and that outcome, but it's not nothing.
Right.
But I don't know the answer to the questions that you're asking. You know,
Exactly.
it's the case that forever when people have been interpreting religious stories, they wrestled with exactly the question that you just described. Mm-hmm. When is it fact? When is it poetry? When is it music? When is it...
You know, the statement he just made that these stories led to civilizations that were abundant, that might not be accurate. I mean, all of Africa follows either Islam or Christianity, and they are the poorest, same as South America. They're all Christian, and they're very poor. Some of those countries are the poorest. And then you have Japan with like the second highest GDP in the world. Some of the best standard of living and health comes from Japan, China, a lot of these Asian countries, with, you know, that are not part of an Abrahamic faith, you know, that would believe in multiple gods, for example, or human gods, for example. So that's not necessarily true, is what he's saying. How is Jordan Peterson like a leading thinker and even someone qualified to speak on this topic? And the reason is because he's not speaking about Christianity. He's just giving some opinion about Christianity because he doesn't care. He's not defending Christianity. He's defending Gnosticism or a mystic Daoist type philosophy. He's trying to convert people into Freemasonry, Kabbalahism. That's his goal, is to convert people to the devil's religion. That's his goal, is to convert atheists who might be saved, or atheists might, who knows, might go to heaven. They might be good people and go to heaven. He's trying to recruit them to the devil's religion. Okay, so he's trying to recruit religious people, atheists, people that don't have deviant beliefs, and he's trying to convert them into people that believe in deviant beliefs. Okay, he has a religion. It's just not, and it's not an Abrahamic religion.
Metaphor? When is it ritual? When is it time bound?
But what I'm saying is that your interpretation of the Bible, if you cannot tell us, again, if these historical events happened or not, that can be the deciding factor in if someone is like damned to hell for eternity or if they go to heaven, right? So that's why
I don't concern myself so much with that particular question. You know, like okay. that would be something that would stem more from an evangelical viewpoint. And I'm not putting that down, by the way. Mm-hmm. You're asking me a question I really can't answer.
Okay.
I'm not claiming even that my interpretations are canonically correct. I can only tell you the consequences of having released them into the world, let's say.
Right. So I guess we've kind of come to a conclusion about that, which I've kind of wrestled with your framework and pushed it kind of to its end, at least in the way that you can answer my question. So I don't know that we can more wrestle with that.
See, I guess the problem is, you see, I don't exactly understand, I don't think anybody does, the relationship between fact and destiny. Okay. You know, well, they're different realms in a way, because knowing what the world is made of doesn't help you navigate through it. Not really. It doesn't provide you with a foundation for navigation. But knowing the facts of the world is obviously useful. And the relationship between those two things, part of that's the mystery of Western civilization and the continued competition between science and religion.
To bridge this kind of understanding between fact and destiny is like an important question that the burden is on Christianity to answer, and specifically interpretations of Christianity. And if we can't do that,
why is
he's not defending Christianity? He's not a Christian, so he's not defending Christianity. You think you're debating a Christian? You're not.
The burden on Christianity,
because it posits, right, that this interpretation, right, is going to be a way to understand God. But if it's faulty, right, that can
what evidence would you accept?
That would be an interesting question, because I've seen people try to answer the question, and I've never really been moved, because I can always attack and then kind of get to this point where the answer is I don't know.
Well, here's an answer.
Let's pause there. I'm sorry, that's time.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the ride.
Well, I definitely picked the...
So the stories in the Bible may be true, they might not be true, they may be allegorical, they may just be for that time period. So when Cain killed Abel, that lesson, I don't know what to do with it. It's confusing. Now let me go to another biblical story where I can manipulate into you believing Satanism, and that's essentially what he's here to do. Okay, that's essentially what Jordan Peterson is here to do. He's here to confuse people, and he's here to get more followers who are intrigued, so he can slowly bring you into the mystic realm of Satanism that eventually will lead to Satanism. It's the same religion. Like I said, I'm repeating myself. I'm sorry. I just want to make this clear. Freemasonry, Daoism, Kabbalahism, Sufism in Islam, Gnosticism, Neoplatonic religion, or philosophy, they say, Hermeticism. There's a lot of names for it. At the end of the day, it's a devil religion that comes from the devil. And as we see here, Jordan Peterson, he's not here to defend Christianity. He doesn't believe in even heaven. It doesn't seem like he even believes in heaven and hell. He doesn't know anything about heaven and hell. He might very well believe in reincarnation, for all we know, okay? Because he's concerned with this life, okay? He thinks this life has value. And somebody following an Abrahamic religion believes this life has zero value, and the afterlife is where all the value is. So it's not the same religion.
Person.
Thank you.
That was very good.
Thank you
really,
so much.
Very good. I don't like talking to win, but there were portions of all the conversations that were truly productive, and that it's instructive for people to see the distinction between a debate that's aimed at local victory and dominance, let's say, even of ideas, and a discussion that's predicated on mutual exploration. And
how can they mutually explore you when you don't declare your beliefs? You don't clearly declare what religion you belong to, or what is the closest religion out there that you ascribe to. How could they debate you? They could never win. Basically, it took them the entire time to realize that you don't actually follow Christian theology. And at the end, he's like, yeah, okay, well, I don't think it's important. I don't think heaven and hell is important. I don't think the story of Cain and Abel is important. So you don't think the story of the prophets is important. You don't think heaven and hell is important. What is important? What's important is going upwards so that your soul can ascend to high levels, so that when you get reincarnated as some higher being. Essentially, it's the promise of more is what the devil promised him. Okay, because God doesn't promise that. God promises you do good, you can get to heaven. Okay, you get judged at Judgment Day, you get to heaven. He doesn't care about heaven. He thinks this life is all there is. And I'm willing to bet he believes in reincarnation of some sort. He believes you create your own hell here on earth. So when you die and get reincarnated as a beetle, you're going to live a crappy life as an insect, and that's your hell. So this is the sort of things that resonates with him. The subject of mercy never came up with him. For example, the fact that we're all going to be sinners and that we all need God's mercy. Okay, or at least it's very helpful to have God's mercy to save us so we go to heaven. That's a very important theme in all Abrahamic faiths, including Islam, including Christianity. For him, there's no such thing as mercy. You have to pass the test. You have to, just like Hinduism, raise your soul to high levels so you can unlock powers and abilities and benefits in this life. Okay, so the God judging you, Judgment Day, he doesn't like to talk about it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit with his worldview. So these students are arguing who they believe to be a Christian, but he's not a Christian at all. He's a heretic. Okay, he follows Neoplatonic philosophies and these type of philosophies I talked about, Hermetic philosophies, Taoism. So it's very dishonest for him to do that, and he's slowly trying to recruit people to this false religion. That's why I found it very important to stay up and watch this and help warn everybody. All right, that's all I have. If you found it helpful, please like, subscribe, comment so I can make more of these if you find it helpful, because I just hate when people try to trick people with religion. I just hate it. People that are ignorant. He admits, I'm ignorant to Christianity. Why are you talking about Christianity? Go teach Egyptian religion. You spend your whole life learning about Taoism and Egyptian religions, all types of world religions in ancient history. Talk about that. Don't try to defend Abrahamic religions with your Taoist beliefs or your Freemasonry beliefs. Okay, don't try to mislead people and act like you're an authority on the topic. You shouldn't be debating this at all. Okay, he didn't even describe his concept of God. I don't even think his concept of God is related to the Abrahamic God at all. He believes God is everywhere, all around us. He believes God is like physics, dark matter, energy, all around us. That's what he believes. I'm sure of it. Okay, all people who can't accept their own weakness and impotence tend to follow. Okay, I don't want to say all people because I can think of some people that do not. Okay, but generally, I find that human beings that are weak, it leads them to evil, and who are impotent, it leads them to evil. And the easiest path to take to reconcile your faith in God and to be evil or be bad is to follow one of these devil religions, these satanic religions. It allows you to be weak, to be unimpressive, to be impotent, and then it gives you an out. It says so that they can say, yeah, I'm just being patient, carrying my cross and working towards a higher goal. Whereas God of Abraham would say, smash those idols, get thrown in the fire. Okay, the God of Abraham would say, you can't have a child with your wife, marry another wife. Okay, that's the God of Abraham. God of Abraham would be like, kill your son. Okay, that's the God of Abraham. Will tell you, go get what you want. As long as you're not doing something sinful, go get what you want. Okay, God likes strength. He likes freedom. He doesn't want people to carry a cross and suffer in silence in a weak manner. But people that are living their life, they live too long. This guy's like 50, 60 years old. He's lived too long of accomplishing nothing he wanted to accomplish. Okay, and then he got picked up, okay, as a good anti outlet to the trans movement. People, he got built up to kind of set up this public discourse to distract the public, or for views, attention, whatever the reason is. It's something provocative. He had a provocative view. He got raised to that level. Okay, and he teamed up with people. He got raised to that level. He got promoted in the media. He's not canceled. He's not saying anything controversial. Okay, he's not saying anything that would have him attacked, because he's saying what society is going to allow you to say. If you think he's promoting Christianity, you're insane. Okay, someone promoting Christianity will not be promoted in society. Okay, they will be attacked. We all know that. Okay, now this is coming as a Muslim. Okay, so it's frustrating. I don't like people using religion, weaponizing an Abrahamic religion to mislead people. Okay, this is something that I don't like.